Do you have a favourite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones. The unvisited ones. The cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show artist, author, and art therapist Angela Kirby. Angela joins us as part of our January Head Game series to talk about how you can use art for restorative or transformational purposes in your own life, even if you're as bad at it as I am. Let's do it. Angela, welcome aboard.
Welcome. Hi, Gordon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you for joining us very much so. Thank you for being part of the January season.
That's it. It's another day in paradise here in Adelaide.
Right.
Nice and warm.
Good. Not oppressively hot?
No, it has been. It has done. Adelaide's done what it normally does. Normally, mind you, we haven't had any 10 days in a row over 40 degrees type thing, but for a few years now, which is really pleasant. So we do the odd 41, 42, 43 type stuff. A couple of days and then it cools right off. So we're actually in probably about early 30s at the moment, so that's pretty good.
Oh, nice. That's still weather you can at least briefly be outside in.
Yeah, that's it. A lot of watering goes down in the morning or the evening.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Angela, as a first-time guest, you know how this goes. I get to ask you the traditional first question. So, Angela, were you a weird kid?
Well, isn't that interesting? Because I've listened to so many people talk about was I a weird kid? And I've thought about it from time to time, especially with the first couple of times that I heard you say it. And I would say I think I was destined to be a weird kid, simply from the onset of being adopted. Not that I knew at the age of 0 that I was going to be a weird kid, but I'd say there was a sense of always feeling like I didn't belong. That wasn't an awful thing at that stage, I don't think. It was just feeling quite estranged or that I didn't belong. That was very, very apparent. I also used to spend quite a bit of time alone because I was brought up on a property out of Mount Gambier in South Australia. And so I spent a lot of time alone. I know that I had a deep frustration with always wanting to be older because there was, a lot of the adults are brothers who were 9 and 11 years older than me, and, frustration of wanting to be older and understanding life. And I must say that life is, at nearly 58, I think life is is still very much perplexing in the way that it delivers. Yeah.
At what stage? It's funny that, isn't it? Like wanting to be older, and then at some stage around 30, you kind of want to flip in the opposite direction and go, now I want to be younger.
Yeah, that's it. I actually felt older at 30 than I do now, strangely enough. I wasn't concerned about it, but then a friend kept going on about it at me, and she was a fair bit younger. Then I thought about it, and I thought, oh, my God, maybe I am getting older. And it came from that era of the Sex Pistols were doing that thing of, when you were 30, it's all over, So, but fortunately, I got past that time. Our first Saturn return was at 28, I think. So, it seemed to move on from there. But, life goes on.
So I've actually, which is something I didn't think I'd be able to say, I've actually been to Mount Gambier. So, I mean, how close was it? What I found very interesting there from a landscape perspective was the you are definitely aware that the ground is filled with holes. It has that kind of very chthonic feel to it, at least walking about the town, because of course there are, sinkholes and caves and so on. Was that sort of like what it was where you were?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, it was only, I think, a couple of years ago that someone's backyard just fell in. Which was really interesting. So, but yeah, I mean, I was down there over Christmas and a friend drove me around, went down to the bay, Port Mac, just 20 minutes from there, I suppose, and then around to Nelson, just over the border into Victoria and then back. So we went sort of via the roads that was saying Ewan Ponds or Piccaninny. And, I know where the little blue lake that we did, quite often we were doing, quite often it might be late at night when we've been to the pub years ago when I used to be a big, drinker on a Friday night type thing. Excuse me. So, but it is very much what is underground. And like the blue lake is seriously amazing. And when I was there the other day, I've never seen it quite so. I mean, I've seen it that blue, but the reflection it was quite mystical in the side of the lake, and then the reflection of that in the water. There wasn't a great deal of difference apart from the fact that it was coming from a different angle. It was quite eerie, beautiful, very, very exquisite. But yeah, there's holes everywhere around the mount.
And when I was sort of connecting to country when I was there a few months ago, you are aware that these holes in the ground are a little bit inhabited. I mean, did you grow up in a haunted farm, or did you bring the weird or outsiderness when you got there?
That is a very good point. I'd have to really sit down and have a conversation about that. I think in that I probably brought the weirdness to the place because it was very much, the beef, cattle and sheep running the property, or mum and dad running the property and doing all things rural. Whereas I guess I love to sit on this amazing, or just a fence, but quite often I walk off into one of the paddocks of this fence and watch the full moon come up and sit there for long extended periods of time. So I never knew why I was contemplating or doing the things that I was doing when I was younger. I just felt compelled to, spend time alone or spend time enjoying nature. I felt close to nature. I felt close to the animals. In fact, they seemed to make more sense than what a lot of the adults did or were around me. I couldn't quite understand the adults.
But yet you wanted to be them. Interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it sounds like, and this is a sort of a trick question, I suppose. It sounds like the weird came before the art, or, Angela, is there any difference?
I think the weird probably came from the art, but maybe it was like if we looked at like a flower budding up, that was the going into the bud, coming into springtime, maybe, for the want of a different description, is that that sense of the bud opening up, then the art appeared. I felt compelled. I didn't go searching for it per se, although I was certainly surrounded by it with mum and dad being interested in the art and writing and literature. But I certainly was, I was more the weird and the exploratory came, and then sitting in my bedroom in my early teens, possibly childhood, I'm not sure, as in before 10, I can't really recall off the top of my head, feeling then compelled to write and then draw. It was a natural progression. I wasn't doing it. It was much later that I stood there in the kitchen saying to my father, announcing, I want to be an artist. And I'd say I already was, but there were just many stages to it, and that's why I referred to the bud opening. It's all sort of condensed there, and it slowly opens up over the time. And then I'd say probably 40, 50 years later going, why did I say that? It's been a journey, but, even if I went the mainstream, it seemed, even if I tried to do anything that was reasonably mainstream, it certainly didn't come about. No one else's sort of, I suppose, agendas or recipes or whatever seemed to work if I tried to put it over my life. It didn't seem to make any sense. So I had to just follow the path. I had to get used to following a path that was more living in that phrase that I love to use is living in the I don't know.
Mm. So, I mean, did you always, like from being 10 or 11 or whatever, did you always want to be an artist, or did you have to kind of do what a lot of artists actually do, or writers or whatever, and go, well, I'm quite into this, but I should go and do something serious, and then kind of realize, actually, this isn't, that didn't work.
Well, there's been many cases of that. I guess initially it was writing, and it was the writing that came from pure frustration. Occasionally it would be poetic, but most of it was really frustrating writing. And then I would just sit there and start on finish up my writing. Not because I was sitting there compelled to finish. It was just, that's enough. And then I would sit there and doodle, and I would feel quite, draw and sketch. But this was not about anything. And I would start to feel exceptionally good. So I was starting to experience mystical states at that age. Then I would feel quite guilty about the writing that I'd written, because quite often it was toxic, but it was expressive. It was getting the SOL, the shit off the liver, excuse me, so to speak. And then it was, ironing it out or soothing it out with the drawing. So it was something that I came across. But then, later the art. I guess I went and studied art when I was 25. And I was always drawing on and off in the background, and I guess it's not really a career. I need to go and get a real job. And I was always off doing different jobs and travelling around, that sort of thing. But I guess it's always been there. I mean, there was a time many years later, probably I think it was in my 30s, that I put down the paintbrush. That was and picking up some art from a gallery when I realised that I'd painted myself into a corner, and there was no more painting to be done. And that's when I began the mandala series that's 10 years ago, so 48, so I was in my 40s. Okay, so it's been the juxtaposition between the real world and the world that I've been working in, that's been more of a healing journey than I would say, because I quite often, like, the art scene was great and I did all that you could possibly do in that regard, having had 10 solo exhibitions and over 100 group exhibitions shown all over the place, etc., locally and internationally. But I felt, the sense of emptiness in there. It didn't seem to make sense. What I really enjoyed was the gathering of people was great, but I felt estranged from it. It was goes back to almost like that, wanting to be an adult as a child. I was feeling quite estranged from it, but at that time, I loved being in the studio drawing, and I loved being around creative people. But it's been I don't know how to explain it. Frustrating, or I can't take the artist out of me. It's a bit like I can't take the country out of me. I can't unlearn what I've learned, and also what has been inherent within me. I think my self-esteem was at a stage where it was, when I was younger, that wasn't good. And I would say that in hindsight now that would, because of that original wound of being adopted, that and having spent many years on working on that now, but that I had. Where am I going with this? I've lost my thread. Where am I? It
was a sort of similar sense of estrangement or separateness that kind of moved you into the mandala project, is I think where you were going. That's a good point. Sorry, I've lost that one part that was there, but the mandala came. The frustration with the way the world was. It was the material world that I was dealing with that was rubbing sharply up against me. So it was more the healing route that I was heading towards. I couldn't, I didn't know that at the time, but that's where I was going. So, and the mandalas was something that I when I started studying,
in my late 30s, the transpersonal art therapy, that I started to I felt compelled to draw these mandalas. When I learnt about them very briefly, I just kept going back to them. I felt they drove me. I started to read a lot about them and started to do a lot of workshops with them, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's like the hanging up the brush, saying goodbye to the art, the painting, and the more materialistic side of painting to make a living. I stopped that and then went on to into the art therapy realm.
Yeah. Those early mystic states when you were drawing after you had done the sort of writing, I mean, was that, in terms of mystic states, was that a sense of oneness? Was that a sense of time loss? I mean, what was happening there? Because I think this is yeah, I'll leave it there and we'll pick up the conversation.
Yeah, it's more a sense of feeling more not in the head, more from, I suppose, the heart sense, I suppose. Feeling it was also time loss. Like there were states where times when I was painting and I would, like, hours would go, literally hours would go. But back in the bedroom there, I felt it would be moments of great excitement, or time it was warping in and out.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't quite understand what was going on.
Yeah, the sense of it being a spontaneous upwelling, like when you say not coming from the head, like wherever it is it comes from, it's probably why you had to do the sort of semi-toxic writing to start with, because you got to kind of clear that channel and then see what happens.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was compelled to do it, and it needed to come out. It almost feels like there I am, something that's a flat object that's now writing, and it's starting to fill out as sort of like a hologram. I know that might sound a bit strange, but it's then I'm writing, I'm getting it out, and then the next stage is drawing it. So it has many developmental stages, and it was something that it was spontaneous to do it. Like, I remember when I was in New York not long after 9/11, having taken some art over there and seeing an exhibition. This is probably 5-6 months after 9/11, and it was an amazing time to be there. In that the one place there were little monuments of art pieces all over New York. Not that I went all over New York, but I went to a gallery, and there was where they had compiled a lot of history, the photographs of the Twin Towers being built, and how none of the equipment could be. It had to be driven in and put up in situ. It couldn't be stockpiled because there was no room. And then so there was these big photographs of that. Then there were artists' work of the over the years of 9/11 of the Twin Towers, and then the actual 9/11, the interpretations of it, and then just everyday people who felt compelled to not just sit there and continue to watch the telly or to sit there and talk to friends. They felt compelled to be creative. So there was little tiny whether it be a gathering of stones and statues, or not statues, I'm looking for objects that felt that represented. I think again it was something that was spontaneous, for the little bits of gatherings that meant something to their family. And then there were really quite naive drawings that were there also that they had put in. It was profound. You could feel the energy in the room, and the passion and the sorrow and the and also the peace, a sense of still peace that rubbed up. The juxtaposition between the peace and the angst and sadness were all sitting alongside of each other quite comfortably. It was, fascinating. It was a fascinating time to be there. So, it's not about being an artist. Like, I wouldn't say that's what I was saying before. There was the sense of not having the self-esteem to say, "Oh, I'm an artist and I can draw." It was more felt compelled to draw. And then over the time, once I started to trust and honour myself more, I started to go, shit, I can draw, And so these people in New York, it wasn't about them being able to draw. They felt compelled to draw. Now, they might not be doing anything creative now, but it was something that certainly nurtured them through this horrendous time.
It's interesting foreshadowings of the therapy stuff. It's weird you mention that, because one of the questions later on is, is an artist simply someone who does art, or is he or she a separate category? Because that drive to create things is, it's a defining human characteristic, right?
Sure, and that reminds me of a time when a friend of mine was saying that her ex-boyfriend, who was quite a well-known Australian artist, and we were studying the transpersonal art therapy together, and she said there was no way that he would be connected emotionally to his work. And yet I would love to have a conversation with him about that. I don't know. I mean, I don't really know the answer to that, because I don't really know how you feel, or other people feel. I can certainly sense that, but I don't know. The art thing, I think, yes, it is inherent within us, but I don't know which angle we come in. Like, we either go to school, go to uni, or go to tech, or we come in a different route, and maybe study much later in life. I don't know. It's I'm sorry, I'm wandering there.
No, it's an eternal question. It's always interesting to get different people's opinions on it. Now, Angela, in the book, I learned something that I'm quite jealous of. You spent some time living on the Red. Tell us about that. You headed north into essentially Central Australia, for people listening who don't know exactly where we're talking about.
Well, but I must admit, when you were in when was it, Ayers Rock, etc.? Was that a year or so ago? That May. I was thinking, damn, I didn't get there. But and nor did I get to Kakadu. But I lived in, strangely enough, in Tennant Creek, of all places, and that was a place that when friends said to me, "Whatever you're doing, don't go to Tennant Creek," and I said, "No, that's okay. I'm flying to Darwin. That's where I'm staying." And so I stayed in Darwin. I can't remember now, a few months, and then headed down to Tennant Creek, because it was a place where it was about earning money and living life in a very different way than what I was accustomed to. So then I also ended up, I went back there twice, strangely enough. And of course, there's a long underlying story under all of this. But that's too boring to go into, really. It was just a hit and miss in relationship, et cetera, et cetera. But in amongst all of that, I was still being the creative, and I had an exhibition and organised an exhibition with a couple of other friends in Alice Springs and places like that. And also in northern South Australia, up in Roxby Downs, I was the first person to have a solo exhibition there, and the guy who was running, who was I think he was the chief, one of the chief guys of Western Mining, who opened the exhibition. Like, it was quite an interesting time living in the Territory and in those really hot places, stinking hot with that red dirt. In fact, I had a couple of bowls of red dirt that I only actually got rid of, just small bowls. Dessert bowls full of red dirt as a memento, because I just loved that red dirt. And I put them to rest, I suppose, 2-3 years ago in amongst some pot plants of mine, because I felt it was time to say goodbye to that aspect. But the living in that, it's extreme climate, and I was living we were, earning good money and playing hard. I mean, we were big drinkers, big smokers, big everything at that stage. It was a lot of my life, my early part of life was following a lot of the shadow aspects of life. And I feel now, I'm sitting back here as a therapist for the last, say, 16 or so years, that I really needed to go through my own stuff to then be witness to a lot of other people's stuff or issues or emotional quagmires or whatever you want to call it, and really dark stuff that so that that I could sit here and listen and be a part and hold space, for the want of a better description, for the people, the clients that I have in my practice, because it's that psycho-spiritual opening that happens. That so instead of numbing it down with tablets or going to the mainstream, going down the mainstream route, this is more opening, that opening them up to who they really are. It's a shedding of that old, the material self, that sense of themselves that's breaking away. So. And I'd say it was more the metaphor too. Now that you bring the Northern Territory up, was that sense of shedding. I was cracking open myself in relationships, in the drinking and the smoking, and taking drugs, etc. Because it was a way of. Because there was a part of me that was always compelled to do what I was supposed to do. You're supposed to go to school, go to uni, get married, live happily ever after. And yet that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. I knew at 14 that I didn't want to have children, and that was a definite. Not be in a relationship, but I knew there was something that was going to be different around what I did. So I say the Northern Territory was a shedding time of me. It was like a peak time in a lot of ways. But yeah, there's it's a very interesting time up there. I couldn't live there now, because it's just that sort of heat I couldn't handle. Like when it gets hot in Adelaide, I say I'd love to live in Tasmania. So quite frankly,
I hear that. Yeah.
Scratch your eyes out, Gordon.
Yeah. It's a really good place too, I think. There's just nowhere like it. Just being on that diet,
exactly.
And at night having the stars where you can basically touch them. Like when you're talking about it being a shedding, like there's literally nowhere to hide from yourself in that kind of space. I don't know if I could live there either, but whenever I talk about it, I want to go back. Like I would like to regularly, I would like it to be an annual or something part of my life, to spend a couple of weeks on the red. But it's just remarkable.
Yeah, well, I'd say the Flinders Ranges, and now I haven't been there for a very long time, but the Flinders Ranges is that reach up and touch the sky, touch the stars as well. It's really magical. I remember feeling quite safe, but a sense that there was more going on behind the scenes in the Flinders Ranges. So that's, I'd say, almost like the beginning of the red, but, I'm probably wrong in saying that. But it that where the soils really start to change and go into those amazing red colours. And I love coming down from the Northern Territory, from Colgra, Tennant Creek, Colgra, and then you almost starting to hit Kirby, a little bit of distance away, and up those little mounds. There's this horizon, the blue sky. Then these little white mounds begin to appear, which are all the mine for the opal, and it looks like the cover of a Pink Floyd album. And it's amazing. So, and it's there. You are driving down this road, and it's like, wow, like this is surreal. This looks amazing. So, and it's almost like that too as you're coming up past Port Augusta, and you're coming up the hill just before Lake Gardner on your left-hand side, that you're looking back before Pimba, that you look back and you've got the Flinders Ranges just starting to hug the right-hand side, and on the left there's a few hills, of course, but saying goodbye to that southern flatness and starting to see the rise of the Flinders, etc. But anyway, it's just a magical place to be. But yeah, it's Australia's, and there's a lot of space of nothing. And it used to be really interesting when I used to live in Roxby Downs, when people would say, "But there's nothing here," and oh my God, and it's like, what?
What do you mean nothing? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's so much. So much.
It's with less human around. Yeah, it's the opposite of nothing. Like it couldn't be more full. That's what the desert is. And I think that's why being out in the desert under the stars is one of those mystical things. I mean, what do you mean there's nothing around? There's no McDonald's.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I know, it's just amazing. Like the ravens and but the eagles, it's so majestic, and Lake Edna. Like, I worked on Lake Edna many years, and it's so weird, And there's no flies out there, but the flies follow you on the back out there, because I worked for SO Minerals as a field assistant back in my early 20s, and again, it's that stark contrast. You having to wear sunglasses that's so bright out there on the lake, and off there in the distance is all the mirages that start to appear. It's quite eerie and quite amazing. Yeah, it's interesting. So fascinating.
I mean, I know you've been through the magical geography course and so on, but do you think
yes.
place or landscape is? You got to grow up in a rural setting. You got to, live under the stars in the desert, and so on. Do you think that's important for your creativity? That sort of placeness?
Definitely. And I've actually, funnily enough, been thinking about that. I don't feel as compelled to express it like I used to, like it was an inherent need when I was younger. There's no doubt about that. I used the landscape to express what was inside. So that almost became the writing in a way. But I'll never forget when I came from the Northern Territory down to South Australia, and it was green, and I'm going, what? How am I going to go from red to all this green? There's green everywhere. It was a strange thing to go through, and especially too when people say you don't put green on green and whatever. But like, the landscape was, and I really miss the landscape. I miss it. I can never forget when I moved to Adelaide 20 years ago, and there was one place that I lived in, and I went out to the backyard, and it was a great little place, and I just cracked up laughing because the only view I had was directly above. There was no long views. It was like where I was brought up. There was no long views. I couldn't climb a tree. Well, I could climb a tree there, I suppose, but although I was a lot bigger than what I was when I was a child, easily to climb trees. But so you could see at vast distance, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're talking about creativity and so on, let's talk art therapy, transpersonal art therapy in particular. I mean, what even is it, and how did you find it?
Well, that was an interesting story, because it was at the time when I was starting to feel a deep frustration with exhibiting and painting, or not painting, but like, why am I doing this? So I was probably going through my own existential crises, I suppose, and I was starting to look at things not making. I started to go, okay, so what is it that I'm interested in? And so I started to look at I like psychology, but no, I've come too far, I would say, in the more metaphysical way, to go into what I felt was like a box. Psychology felt like a box to me, and that's not poo-pooing psychology, because I think it's amazing and I'm still very interested in it. Well, it is a part of my work, but not the mainstream. So then I went to some time went by, and okay, so it's not that, but it's got to be creative, and it's like, oh my God. So it's not psychology. It's got to be creative. What is that? Even more perplexed, which was good in hindsight, because the moment, if I'd known what it was, I would have tried to change it or fix it, or, model it in something which would be something in the I know rather than the I don't know. So I went to a gallery one day, and I was looking after this gallery, and I ended up swapping over this lady. She came in and swapped over, and we got on like a house on fire. We were chatting away, and she started to talk about art therapy, and I remember distinctly feeling extremely excited about it. Like it was a deep, deep feeling of wow, of connection. And so I ended up, but I left there thinking, oh, well, it's Adelaide. It's, a bit like Mount Gambier at that stage, a little bit too in the back of Burke to have something like that. Misjudgmental. And so but 2 or 3 weeks later, my ignorance was quashed, because or naivety, because I was reading the Adelaide Review and thumbing through the paper, and there was transpersonal art therapy next intake over, I think it was the next month or so, a couple of months, I don't know. And I thought, that's it. So it found me, and that's how most of my life has come along. So I've learnt to live like that, and I would probably suggest that most of us are. Although that is a big conversation, because we've come from an era where all these models of, and this is the way, and, goal setting and blah, blah. It's like never seemed to amount to anything. Well, I've done that and it didn't do anything. Anyway, so I had the interview, and then day one, it was like Dr. Ralph, or Raphael, as he calls himself now, Locke, he was teaching us, and so he was, talking, and he was also taking. So it was an experiential course. So he then was taking us through a process, and I just knew I had arrived. So I was starting to learn intellectually what I was doing for myself in my bedroom back in my early teens, and continued to do so. So it was like, oh my God. And even all the drugs that I'd taken and the alcohol, those altered states of consciousness, were all becoming relevant. In fact, it turned out I think I was the only one in the class who really had gone down many different routes of, the mystical states. It was like, wow. And I was, because my father had died by that stage, and I'm sort of ha-haing to Dad, see, it's all come in handy, because I wasn't, the good girl going off to uni type thing, It's like,
if anything, when I was drunk, I was studying. Yeah. Exactly. I was doing the real life work. I'm in the University of Life. I was in the big picture. So funny, So yeah. So then I studied that on and off over the next couple of years or so, and it was all experiential. So we would do 4 or 5 days in a row, intense work together. So, basically, whatever the clients go through, I've been through also. But it's profound work, and you can't hurry it along. There's, and everybody's at varying degrees of their stages of their life. It was deeply profound, and I thought I'd done a bit of work by then, but oh my God, no, I hadn't. And it was, deeply profound, especially working with the clay and. That some of the deep sadness, like in someone's, you're watching a movie, it's like it's really sad, and it's quite light and breezy sad. I know that sounds shallow, but that really deep sadness that was starting to come up, that pain body, or that the somatic stuff of the original wounds or the trauma that had been experienced or whatever, was starting to come through. It was seriously profound work. Where you start and where you end, are quite different. And I remember there was one day we had each of us done a big body of work where we had a big, huge piece of paper, and you lay down on, and somebody does the outline of your figure, and you start to, I can't remember exactly what we were doing in it, but it was, you go off and you do your own sort of level of the different stages of, I suppose it could be the chakras and a mixture of your life. It was a whole mixture of things. Anyway, and then we hung them up inside the classroom, because it was up in the Adelaide Hills. It was a perfect spot, and hung them up on the walls. And I remember standing there and feeling like I had to get out of here now. I knew that we were all each of us were going to go around and talk about our work and explain, express, blah, blah, blah. There's probably only about 8 or 9 of us in the class at that stage, because there's a few dropouts because it's intense work. But it's going to bring your stuff up, and if you don't want to face your stuff, don't do it, But anyway, I was standing in the classroom, and I was probably 4 or 5 people away from being the next person to speak, and I was, as I said, felt compelled to get out, and there was a part of it again that it was terror, deep terror, that I wanted to look. I was looking out
at the back of the classroom. I could have just walked out the hallway and said, listen, I'm going to be back in about 10 minutes. See you soon. But there was this fight or flight that sat in, and I felt like I needed to flee and crash through the window and run down the hill. It was really ridiculous intensity that I felt that I needed to contain, and I'll never forget it. And once it got to my time and talk, it was fine. It wasn't that I had anything to really, in particular, hide, but it was bringing up. It was connecting to something very deep that I felt that I needed to flee from this situation, which I'd say goes right back to my childhood. Fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating because it shows that. I mean, because we're going to get to, I'll get your definition of what art therapy actually is, but what it demonstrates is what does look seemingly innocuous. And this is very magical, like, an outline of a human form or fucking about with some clay.
Yes.
It's an indication of, in fact, how potent it is because of what it can map or connect to. And that's really interesting that you think it's, why am I on the verge of a panic attack because of an outline? And you go, well, that's really interesting. That's quite potent. But I mean, that's the good question for what even is art therapy then, Angela?
Well, and that's a big question, because in a lot of ways, there's a lot of times where I've said art, I think it's expressive. I think it's about expressing yourself. It doesn't have to be. A lot of people go, I don't do art. It's like, well, forget about art. We're not going to art school. Thank God I don't have to draw that big thing in the middle of the goddamn room. Oh my God, how am I going to fit that on the piece of paper? This is about, instead of sitting there, someone talking at you as a counsellor or something, which I do with clients. It's about doing the deeper work. So it's about expressing yourself. It's about, instead of, sand therapy might be a really great way to look at it. So there you are, you've got some trays of sand in front of you, you're gathering objects together, and you're starting to play around with those objects and put them into a place that within that tray where it feels like it's telling a story. Now, adults will try and tell a story there, whereas we'll do that quite differently. So art therapy is instead of sitting there being talked at or talking to, it's about part of that, but then starting to do the deeper, more experiential work. So, and I believe that's where the big shifts start to take place, especially if someone starts to really open up. They go into I do some work with what do you call those air balls, those big balls, exercise balls, I think.
Oh, right,
they
yeah. Like big medicine, like the ones you sit on?
Well, the ones you sit on, that's right. So so I'd have them, that between myself and the client, and I'd start to, even, pushing the energy of the feelings. The eyes are closed, pushing the energy of of the feelings that are coming up, because sometimes there's resistance, or there's I can't quite pick that pen up and draw or whatever, especially when we're doing group work. Now I'm starting to go all over the place. Hang on, contain it, Ange. So they've got the ball in the middle, and so the eyes are closed and they start to go into their feelings. It's like the clay. It's like it starts to take you into altered states of consciousness. It takes you into a dreamy state. You're sitting there years ago on the telephone, or, years ago when we were on those old landlines, and you're sitting there doodling. You're sitting there talking to someone, you can't go anywhere, so you're sitting there just doing a ... or a drawing, just like it's not a drawing per se, you're just scribbling. And it's taking you into that dreamy state. So back to the ball, you're pushing that energy in to the ball of the feelings that person is going through, or whatever. So I'm shutting up. I'm just going, just encourage them occasionally. And because they start to connect to who they are, or to the it's like the floodgates open up. It's like, goes back to the metaphor of the Northern Territory that opened me up. I needed to go and crack open in the desert, so to speak, to be able to then open up to who you are, before it was all closed over and not the self-esteem, rugged up with sadness and self-esteem was out the window. Whereas when you shed that skin, that layer, you open up to a different aspect. And this is where time goes. I can keep an eye on the time. This process can go for up to half an hour, 3/4 an hour, an hour, and a lot of emotionality comes, a lot of tears, a lot of snot flies, a lot of stuff. That, who cares? That it is what it is, and then it goes into a deep stillness, and the quiet becomes very loud, and then the right time arrives for the client to then open their eyes gently, and then I might have them go and just pick up some colours. Don't think. In fact, take your head, put your head back over here, and go over there and just connect to your heart. Just drawing, like no thinking. You have official permission to not think. And that's really what it is, so that you're really starting to connect to your inner world. That releases the valve of the pain and suffering, which is not for me to diagnose or say is this or that. That's, I'd say, an opinion or a doubt of the DSM something or other. No disrespect to the DSM 5 or 6 or whatever it is, or 4. Or it's a sense of opening up to what needs to be released, and that's for that their body aligns it. It's like you cut yourself open, or you fall over. Your body wants to heal itself. So the art therapy does the same thing. It's just a different way of doing it. Have a container to let the uncontained open itself up. So there's many different aspects with the art therapy. From pastels. I use mostly pastels on paper now with clients. I don't do any painting per se.
That's a good question though. So does it matter in the sort of initial sessions, because you were talking about clay having a different emotional resonance when you're going through the training?
Oh, it's big, yeah.
But does it matter just initially what material you're working with? Question one. Follow up to that is, because this is a January show, so we want to give people some
sure.
Well, let's do some of these things. Let's do this. Go out there and do these kind of things. Does it need to be, this is a weird way of describing it, pointless art? Like, does it need to be, I'm just going to create something for the purposes of this session, so for the purpose of this therapeutic session? Or can it be like, well, actually, I need to put this collage together for my kid's bedroom or something anyway? Like, can you double them up? Or would you recommend professionally the first time just do it normal?
I would say... I guess if you've never come across it before, it's probably good to have, it could be good to have a bit of a dot point. Here are the materials. Here's the blah blah. Now do this, or you might find that after you've done that, you've actually been doing something spontaneously anyway, gathering bits and pieces and doing your own form of art therapy. You don't have to be an artist or whatever to do that. But, I'd say what you've said just then was, I'd say both of them, contained, uncontained, there are no right or wrong ways. Mind you, I'm sure there are people who would say that there is.
I wonder if there is for a first session. So, like what you've just described to me, Angela, it looks very much. I mean, this would have come up in the Journeying course for you as well. Very much like a Jungian Red Book method. Very much like a lot of indigenous sort of post-dream creative practices, and it also looks like a kissing cousin to something like automatic writing. So there's a wide question here, and it's a big one, which you're allowed to not have the correct answer for, because I don't think anyone does.
Good.
Why does it work?
Yeah, well,
that's a metaphysical question, right?
Yeah,
why does drawing on a piece of paper transform your life?
I look, that's a really good question, and I think that it's something that's an ongoing process. But from where I see clients here in the beginning, who are suffering from whether it be toxic relationships, codependent, this, that, and the other, or addictions, or or they're young, ill, older, going through an existential. I don't know. They're all over the place. That if they stay with the work, that emotional shape shifting, they change. They're completely. I don't know why it does it. It's because I don't reorganize the pieces. I don't ask my saw or my cut, how are you going to pull together? It's, if I just know that through different levels of working, some of it's quite fast, some of the what am I trying to say? Some of the healing aspect, for the want of a better description there, it happens quite rapidly. It's quite obvious in the feeling. And then over time, it's like the person's persona changes. Like even on a one session, they look quite different.
Well, that's broadly, it's actually, in fact, precisely mapping to other forms of therapy, of course, which exactly. is the medicine is front-loaded, because typically by the time someone shows up to your door, for instance, Angela, or a depth psychologist or whoever, yes.
Something
has upwelled within them that is like, well, I'm going to go find some healing now.
Yes.
And so you kind of front-load the medicine of, I came to have this addressed, and then there's the ongoing process of, well, what else can upwell and refine and transform over a longer time? But that's kind of why I think this is such a good January episode, right? Because that there will be people out there. I mean, let's kind of close out the discussion with some techniques that people listening can do. Like, what can it address, and do they need to know what it's going to address? Or can you just have a target of, I would like to, I could be more psychologically healthy, or I'm after some psychological or emotional healing heading into 2019, or do they need a specific goal, like I'm a bit fucked up from that last relationship and there's some stuff I need to let go of? So that's the first bit. And then what kind of techniques for someone doing this solo who's just listened to this show can they do in a comparatively safe way? Because again, therapy has trained professionals for a reason.
Yes.
What kind of things can people who are listening to this do that can maybe lead to a more beneficial 2019?
Well, look, one of the things that when I've done workshops is that I say as an ongoing tool is, if you can create your own space. It's a bit like, you have your own altar, your own space in your room, or your whatever room you set up. So it's always set up, ready to go. So it's always got that piece of paper. You might get just a blank piece of, one of those pads, the A4, not A4, A1 size sheets of paper, and, note paper to write on, etc. And you just have it sit there. You get some chalk pastels. Now, this is not about being an artist. So you might just say it's expressive. I'm going to express myself. You might want to light a candle. You might want to, do that sort of thing to, like, quite often what I used to do for myself, I would find before I'd sit down and start drawing, I used to it's almost a sense, some might say is a sense of avoidance. So I'd fiddle around doing a whole lot of other things and getting myself ready, then finally sit down and begin to do some work. But sometimes if you're just about to head out the door and you're feeling a deep sense of, I can't fucking handle this any longer, and you're in your head and you're upset and whatever, is just go into that space. Just do some quick doodling. Pick up whatever colour, doesn't matter what colour, and start spreading it out on the paper. It doesn't matter. You can go back there again, get your fingers all over it, whatever. Yes, your hands are going to get dirty, but you can wash them. And you might find, I would say within a few minutes or a couple of minutes, or it will start to shape shift what that fucked up feeling was, and into a much more centered sense of feeling. Okay, so you could go outside and sit on the ground and just start moving around what's in front of you. It doesn't have to be, something that's, literally on a piece of paper, or, in my book, I've got 12 processes there you can take yourself through. But again, if you feel that it's getting too intense, you might need to see somebody to do some work. Our cars need servicing just like we do. So we do too type thing, that sort of simplistically.
So I'm sure you've had this question. No, it's good, but I'm sure you've had this question a bunch of times then. Because you just said start doodling. What should I draw, Angela? Like how do you like because that's all well and good, but for people coming at it cold, it's like, what should I draw? You go, no, just draw anything. You go, that's not good. Like, can we be specific and say, honestly, just get the crayon or the pencil and just start swirling that pencil around on the paper and don't have any expectations for it to turn into an aeroplane?
Exactly. This is not an art class. This is, as I was saying, sometimes I say to the clients, and some of the clients are so in their head, they're so frightened of doing something creative, especially in a group of people, that a space between, where the hand is sitting on the lap to get up and pick that piece of pencil, the colour up and draw is intense. It's like jumping into a chasm, and I say it's okay. Take a big deep breath and just pick a colour up and start moving it around in front of you. Yeah. You are not trying to reach or do anything. You're just starting somewhere and you'll know when to stop. You're not trying to draw anything. This is not about being a drawer. You could use it with sand, or you could use anything. You don't have to. There's quite often a lot of pain and suffering that comes up as a result of I'm not an artist. But I'd beg to differ to say that actually we all are to varying degrees. Some of it, it's a natural talent, it's inherent, it's there. But I'd say if we dig deep enough, possibly we could all utilise it at different stages of our life.
Well, I mean, I asked that question because there's also a personality type component where people will say, when you go, okay, go and do some art therapy, they're like, well, do you want me to draw a pirate ship? Like, what is it that you want? But the other thing that I noticed personally is I actually adored my art teacher in high school. She was amazing, but the curriculum was terrible. Right, so the smell of paint activates some childhood memories,
triggers
of not being as good as some of the other people in the class because of the way the curriculum was done, and I kind of get it, but the way the curriculum was organized, that you did have people would be ranked for different technical competencies, and that's fine, whatever. But because I wasn't as good at them, when I smell paint and paper, I'm immediately put in a kind of anxious, inferior childhood memory, and I thought, so I'm going to do this, and I'm specifically going to do it with paint.
Good, because look, I would say I'm with you on that. I mean, I had terrible memories of going to art school. It was, there were great moments of, excitement, but there was I can't do that. Oh my God, you what? And so it was always kind of crazy being asked to do all these things at art school. Even it's like, oh my God, it was terrifying. So when I started to do art therapy, it was like I unzipped myself and thank fuck for that.
My teacher instilled in me a love of art. It's such a bizarre 50% theory, 50% practice topic, right? Because you get the whole history of European art, and obviously it was Australia, so we did Indigenous art and all this stuff, and it's amazing. The history of it and the artists and all this is just this wonderful content. And my teacher was very good, very passionate about art. Obviously she became an art teacher. And then the other half of it was right, colour wheel, go.
I know, goddamn. The memories. They were scary days. But going to art school was scary days, and art at school was scary days. So, it was not deemed as being necessary. So sorry.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely, and that's just a story of the time, and it's one of those things that
exactly.
Sometimes the deepest sources of medicine, particularly in this sort of, materialist lunacy, are not only free, but right there and are under the most sustained attacks, right? And I think this is quite a good one, because if we share that weird childhood memory, I mean, I have amazing artists who listen to the show, but if we share that weird childhood memory, it's reasonable to assume quite a number of people listening do. And so, I mean, I'm going to do it with the paints because I want to tackle a bunch of things at once. But I mean, let's, as we come to the end of the show, so we started with, you don't need a shall we say, an emotional complex you need to clear. You don't actually need a therapeutic goal as much as just I'm going to beyond releasing as a step one. And a step two is some form of optional ritualization. As you say, you can mark out a space, light a candle if you want, or if not, just sit somewhere with the paper and the crayons or the paints or whatever it happens to be. And then, so that's the third step. Step 4 is, begin the process of using a particular color on a particular medium, and you don't need to draw a pirate ship.
No.
And step 5 is like you stop. Oh, there you go.
Sorry. I sit and like notice the emotions that are going on,
that's
and
good.
where they're sitting. That's and if you need to write them down to get them out, as opposed to them staying there stagnating, give yourself permission to do it. But this is a time for getting to know you. This is not about performing for anybody else or doing this for anybody else. This is a coming home. Really, that's how I see it.
That's nice.
So, and this is a really good thing too. Is what I love doing with sigils is the sense of the sigil course. That's great. I loved it. But the black paper and those the gold pens, and I really liked how you spoke about going to Office Works and looking at all the different colours. And pens and things you can work with. See, they're great to work with as well. But that gold pen, a thick line, a thin line, and letting a mark be, did I fuck that up? No, you didn't fuck it up. According to who? That's exactly the way it's meant to be. Let it direct you. I've learnt that mistakes aren't mistakes.
No, agreed.
That can be another conversation.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the sigils because the gold on black, mostly gold, sometimes silver, is because of my lack of confidence and admittedly experience. Like there's a reason for my lack of confidence in art, right? And so it's one of the reasons that I'm glad you came on the show for the sort of January series, because whilst that is a successful kind of workaround for me and sigils, and because I've been doing it that way for so long, I'm not expecting them to change. It is nevertheless a sort of band-aid over something that I want to look at, which is exploring my own confidence in I guess, non-verbal or non-writing creative expression. So it's weird you bring that up, because that's literally why I'm going to do all the paints and all that, because I expect the upwelling to maybe towards the end of the year have a changed effect. I've sort of been kicking the tires on different creative processes for sigils anyway, but this is one of my unacknowledged goals. Is I'm going to do some individual art therapeutic techniques and see what happens to my sigil practice.
You could do that with the book too. Do each month do something that from my book. Use a mandala or whatever it was. But going back to that sigils thing just quickly, is that I would say all the mandala work that I've done plus the artwork really have been my tarot deck, so to speak. It's like, for example, like with sigils, they become, you draw, where you're heading to. Like there's a part of you that your psyche is ahead of you. So like if I'm in the city and I start drawing spontaneously attracted to the sea and whatever, I find a few months later I'm living near the sea, or I'm spending more time down the sea, that sort of thing.
This is the widening out of sigils that it puts it directly next to or identical to other techniques that we were just talking about, and it's why it looks kind of like Jung's Red Book process and automatic writing and art therapy and so on. I think it is profound in its implications.
Absolutely. You'll be really excited, Gordon. I look forward to hearing all about what it's like in 12 months' time.
Exactly. Well, Angela,
thank you.
This has been great. If you would like to tell people, one, about the book, and also where they can find out more about yourself and so on. And of course, for people listening, this will be in the show notes.
Okay. Well, yes, I've just published a book called Creating Wisdom and Magic in Life and Love, and that's available on Amazon and Balboa Press, et cetera, and in the book is the first aspect of it is and my website, so that's frizzkirby.com, and there's links in there. But the book basically is a bit of my story, then a therapeutic aspects, of my work as a therapist, then there are 12 processes using the mandala as a template, I suppose, to work with. And then there's 54 mandalas in there that I have drawn, and you could use that as an oracle. They're actually not a deck of cards, although I have made one deck out of them for myself to use. But you can flick the book open and use it as an oracle for the day or the week or whatever. And also there's a little bit of poetry, and then there's some recommended people at the end of the book that I suggest to read.
Yeah.
And also there's some little tiny mandalas that were supposed to be one per page, but they ended up making 4 coaster types. So you could fill those in as a sense of, having a lace work to work within with colours if you like. So there you go.
It's very much an art therapist book, having now had this discussion with you. The sort of interweaving of your journey and therapy and what you can do with it, and some things people have already done with it. It was, it's a unique product. So we got the website, we got the book. That's great. Yep. All right. Well, I will obviously be in touch to let you know how I get on panicking myself back to Year 7 art class.
Some work to get through.
Yeah.
You'll be okay. It's a big, deep breath.
All right, Angela. This has been so good, and I hope people are inspired to get out there and do that thing. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, so it turns out I don't actually have any paints, but I'm off to Queensland tomorrow to give my sold-out presentation, Speak of the Devil, which will subsequently be available in the premium members area. And so I've resolved to buy some paints somewhere in Brisbane or northern New South Wales, where I'll be speaking at the Illuminate conference in Coffs Harbour the following weekend if you happen to be in the area. I'm hoping the fact that the paint set will fall somewhere in between a talisman and a souvenir will get me over that first anxiety hurdle and into the experience, because I'm definitely going to do it. Being shit at something hasn't stopped me from trying it in the past, Exhibit A, permaculture farming, but just generally somewhere in amongst Jung's process in creating the Red Book, my own methods of sigil formulation and activation, dream diaries, and physicalizing or ritualizing dream experiences in the way we explore in the premium member course on journeying. You can sort of squint at all of these at once and just catch a glimpse of some underlying unifying mechanism or process. And if I may modify Angela's advice, Angela being a professional and me definitely not being one, so who knows, but if you're going to give some individual art therapy a go, see what happens if you start with the medium you are least comfortable with. I'm currently, anyway, weirdly looking forward to having those high school anxieties bubble up in a context where I can come to terms with them in the Jungian sense, while also just generally adding a few lanes to the highway between the conscious and the unconscious. So check out Angela's stuff in the show notes, including her book, and let me know if you do or are planning on a little art therapy, and that would be either at runesoup.com or the RuneSoup Facebook page, or as ever, find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.